He had spent the last half hour watching his stunning wife maneuver around the ballroom, timing her movements perfectly, so that when the clock struck midnight, she would be as far from him as possible. Surrounded by her affluent, self-important associates, she would be passed around like a party platter, kissed and touched by all the executives from his workplace, with particular attention from her arrogant trust fund baby boss. This wasn't speculation. It had been the same story at every New Year's Eve party his company had hosted for the past 2 years. The first time, he'd written it off as a case of too much champagne. But the following year, the warning bells were loud and clear, prompting him to start making preparations. As he stood there, feeling a tug at his coat sleeve, he turned to see Deirdre, Josephine's best friend and partner in crime. "Happy New Year, Mike," she exclaimed, pulling him down for the obligatory pity kiss she planted on him every year. He barely brushed her lips before stepping back, gazing into her brown eyes. Normally, Deirdre would wear a sly smirk, the kind that screamed she was in on secrets he wasn't privy to, because she was part of the same privileged circle as his wife and boss. But tonight, her expression was different, tinged with pity and concern. "Mike, don't take this too seriously," Deirdre said softly. "It's just a New Year's tradition. Kissing and celebrating. She'll be back soon, and you'll see once again how much she loves you." Mike stared at her skeptically. Deirdre tried again. "She really does love you, you know. Josephine is just outgoing, impulsive, and full of life. You, on the other hand, are thoughtful and reserved. She needs moments with people more like her, but those times only make her appreciate you more. Is that why she spent the company Christmas party under the mistletoe, kissing every one of her co-workers?" Mike countered, his voice icy. "We go to her firm's holiday event, and she spends the evening dancing with and kissing all the top executives. Now, at my company's New Year's ball, she's doing the same thing, dancing and making out with everyone but me. Interesting way to show appreciation, wouldn't you say?" Deirdre's usual confidence faltered, and she looked away, clearly flustered. "Mike, I understand how upset you are, but—" "No, Deirdre, I think I finally do understand," Mike interrupted, his tone cutting. "For the first time in 5 years of marriage, I get it." Turning his back on her, he walked to their table, retrieved the briefcase he had left underneath, and pulled out a brightly wrapped package. Without looking back, he removed his wedding ring, tying it to the bow that adorned the gift. Facing Deirdre again, he extended the package. "I'm leaving now. Please give this to your friend whenever she's done entertaining her admirers. Tell her I said Happy New Year, and that I hope 2025 brings her everything she deserves." As he started to walk away, Deirdre grabbed his arm. "Don't leave, Mike. I'll go get her. She's just had too much champagne again. You need to take her home." "No, Deirdre, I don't," he replied firmly. "She has a room here at the hotel. She's been here all day, entertaining while I was at work. And you knew, didn't you? You've been with her. She has her car, her clothes, everything she needs. I'm sure one of the men she's been kissing will be happy to take care of her. Or maybe all of them will. Goodbye, Deirdre. I can't say I'll miss seeing you again." Exiting the ballroom, Mike nodded at Helen, the HR director. He had spent the afternoon with her earlier, while his boss and his cronies set up the event. In reality, they'd been in the luxurious suite his boss had charged to the company card, along with Josephine. Mike had photos and video to prove it. and Helen had her own copies, ready to send to the chairman of the board within minutes. After Mike left, Helen and her husband, a former pro football lineman, moved toward Josephine, who was surrounded by her usual crowd of admirers. Deirdre fought her way through the throng, calling Josephine's name in a panic. The commotion caught Josephine's attention, breaking her embrace with the company's CEO, George. Josephine frowned at her friend's frantic expression as Deirdre held out the brightly wrapped package. "Mike left this for you." "He's gone," Deirdre said. "He watched you flirt and tease all night, and when you started kissing all these men, he handed me this and left." Josephine smiled dismissively. "Oh, Mike. He always throws these little tantrums when I ignore him for a few minutes. I'll go home, beg for his forgiveness, and everything will be fine. He loves me. See? He even left me a gift." "Joe, I don't think it's a gift," Deirdre tried to interject. But Josephine was already untying the bow. When the wedding ring tied to it fell to the floor, George bent to pick it up. Holding it out to her, he smirked. "Isn't this your husband's wedding ring?" Josephine froze, staring at the ring in confusion. Deirdre hesitated. "I tried to warn you." Ignoring her, Josephine tore into the wrapping, revealing a white gift box. Smiling, she shook it lightly. "It's heavy," she remarked, cutting the tape sealing it. But as soon as the final strip was undone, the box's contents spilled onto the floor. Glossy photos scattering everywhere. Squatting in her knee-length gown, Josephine began picking up the pictures, while others nearby did the same. As realization dawned, the room fell eerily silent. Josephine's eyes widened in horror, and a piercing "no" escaped her lips. Her anguished cry drew even more onlookers, all of whom gazed in stunned disbelief at the evidence before them. She glanced up and caught the horrified expression on George's face as he grabbed the glossy 8x10 photo lying near his feet. Holding it against his tailored suit, he shouted, "What the hell, Joe?" loud enough to draw everyone's attention. Heads turned, and all eyes were drawn to the scattered photographs, showing Josephine in compromising positions with men who were not her husband. The photos featured not only Josephine and George, but also Josephine with other executives from Mike's company, as well as her own colleagues and superiors. While the collection didn't cover every position from the Kama Sutra, Mike had chosen pictures that left no doubt about Josephine's activities. Faced with the damning evidence, Josephine fainted, falling backward. She narrowly avoided hitting her head on the tile floor, thanks to George's shoe breaking her fall. Deirdre knelt beside her, cradling the back of her head and lightly slapping her cheeks. Joe, are you okay? Talk to me." While Deirdre fussed over Josephine, others in the crowd began picking up the photos and examining them. A woman nearby suddenly slapped her husband hard across the face, yelling, "You jerk! No wonder you can't keep me satisfied." The man looked at her, stunned into silence, until she swung her purse and smacked him squarely in the eye. He screamed, clutching his face, and collapsed to the floor when she delivered a swift kick between his legs with her pointed-toe pump. The woman knelt to sift through the remaining photos, then raised her voice to announce, "Ladies married to Taylor & Sons Management, you might want to grab a few of these pictures. I see several familiar husbands here. Let's talk about getting a group discount on divorce lawyers." 9 women immediately knelt to examine the photos, while the men in the room began to retreat, some looking guilty and others terrified. "There are USB drives too," one woman shouted, holding up a flash drive. "No telling what's on these," A pretty blonde screamed at a distinguished older man nearby. "You remember our prenup, don't you? I'll bankrupt you." "Baby, I'm sorry," the man stammered, backing away. "It didn't mean anything. She kept coming on to me. It was only one time, and she wasn't nearly as good as you." "Lying bastard!" she shouted, lunging at him. Clutching a photo in one hand, she swung wildly at him, chasing him around the room as she hurled insults and curses. Another woman stood frozen, sobbing, as she clutched her chest with one hand and waved a photo in the other. Her husband sat nearby, his face buried in his hands, crying as well. A man holding a photo confronted a stunning woman across from him. "What the hell is this?" he yelled. "You said you'd never do a threesome because you'd never be with another woman." Her face flushed, and she bolted, tottering precariously in her 4-inch heels. One by one, women began calling out names as they distributed incriminating photos. Each new revelation brought more chaos, as wives confronted their husbands and heated arguments erupted throughout the ballroom. Josephine had regained consciousness and was sitting up, her eyes glazed as she stared at the scene unfolding around her. A man in a sleek tuxedo knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Josephine looked at him blankly and nodded. "I'm Josephine Lord," she said quietly, almost in a daze. "But I don't think anyone can help me now." "You're Josephine Reynolds Lord?" the man asked, his tone incredulous. She nodded again. "I am. Who are you?" The man handed her a packet of documents and snapped her picture with his phone. Then, standing, he loudly announced, "I'm a process server, Josephine Reynolds." "Lord, you've been served." These papers outline Michael Morris Lord's petition for divorce, supported by the photographs and videos enclosed. He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't get a chance to view the photos, copies of the divorce documents, public records, will soon be available online. For a small fee, I can provide links to a website containing a full archive of her activities over the past year. If you're interested in evidence involving your spouse's participation, contact me through the site." With a deep bow, the man strode away, leaving behind tears, fury, and sheer panic. While he would likely face backlash for his theatrics, he was paid handsomely for the job. Besides, in New York, scandals were just another day's business, and his office in New Jersey gave him a buffer of influence and protection. Josephine sat slumped against Deirdre, her face buried in her friend's shoulder as she wept uncontrollably. Around her, the faces of her peers reflected only contempt, pity, and anger. The admiration, desire, and envy she'd enjoyed her entire life were nowhere to be found. In that moment, she grasped the full extent of her disgrace and the irreparable damage to her once privileged life. George Taylor, the CEO, barked orders for the photos to be collected and destroyed. Turning to Helen, he snapped, "I want a letter of reprimand for Mike Lord on my desk Monday, followed by his termination papers." Helen maintained a neutral expression as she replied, "I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, but Mr. Lord resigned this afternoon. He submitted his notice, cleared out his belongings, and is already gone. The chairman of the board has accepted his resignation." Fuming, Taylor demanded, "I'll reject it and fire him myself. He'll never work in this industry again." "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir," Helen said calmly. "Mr. Lord has already secured a new position with a consulting firm you approved last month." Taylor's face turned beet red as he muttered curses under his breath, prompting onlookers to worry he might have a stroke. Helen and her husband exchanged subtle glances of satisfaction, squeezing each other's hands beneath the table. Meanwhile, Mike Lord was driving out of New York City in his newly purchased four-wheel drive Chevrolet Suburban, equipped with a powerful turbo diesel engine. His route to Austin, Texas, was planned to take 24 hours, but he intended to stretch it over a week, savoring the small-town charm of the rural states he would traverse. He planned to abandon the busy interstates after reaching Virginia, opting instead for winding country roads and quaint towns. He'd stop at roadside stands to sample homemade jams, dine in local eateries, and experience the slower pace of life far removed from the chaos he was leaving behind. He had come to despise their shared accounts. Though the funds had been divided, it was only after he had purchased his SUV, a hefty $88,000 vehicle, that he felt some balance. Over the years, she had outspent him tenfold, so using part of her money for the purchase was satisfying. Under the agreement he proposed, each would keep their investments and retirement accounts, and she would retain the penthouse apartment. He even agreed not to pursue her trust fund as long as she signed the divorce papers within 10 days. The radio in his SUV was tuned to Sirius XM's best traditional country station, the Roadhouse. Jo had always hated country music, just as much as she detested oldies, which made his next stop, classic vinyl, a delightful act of rebellion. He was finally his own man, no longer the clueless husband she had shaped him into for the past 2 years. He had taken charge of his life at last year's New Year's Eve party and spent the entire year preparing for this moment. Taylor and Sons might survive his departure, but he doubted it. Under George's incompetent leadership, and without the innovative designs and patents Mike had contributed over the last 5 years, he expected the company to collapse within a couple of years. The thought of their impending downfall brought a grin to his face. His work had accounted for more than half of the firm's sales and profits in the prior year, and he had even better designs ready to launch at his new company. Randolph Taylor, George's father and the firm's chairman, might sell the business before it completely fell apart. But before that happened, George's incompetence would be laid bare for the world to see. A thought that gave Mike immense satisfaction. Tonight, he had exposed George and his unfaithful wife for the deceitful individuals they were. Over the next year, he planned to reveal George's failings as a businessman by allowing his new firm to dominate Taylor and Sons, crushing it like the bug that had just splattered on his windshield. The image made him chuckle. He imagined Josephine's parents finding out about the scene he had caused at the party. Helen had already called him to share how spectacularly it had unfolded. Watching Jo spill the photos in the ballroom had surpassed his wildest expectations. While he had rigged the box to collapse when the tape on any 3 sides was removed, he hadn't anticipated such a public spectacle. Her parents had never liked him, looking down on him from the start. They had been horrified when their supposedly flawless daughter chose to marry a man without an Ivy League pedigree. His engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines and master's from the University of Michigan meant little to them. To them, even a liberal arts degree from Brown would have been preferable to his common background. He reveled in the chaos he had caused and in the destruction yet to come. Meanwhile, Deirdre and her husband Albert had taken Josephine home. The moment she stepped into the apartment and noticed his absence, she broke down, sobbing. On the ride back, she had rehearsed what she would say to Mike, that her affairs were meaningless, that they hadn't hurt their marriage, and that they had been for recreation or to influence decisions that ultimately benefited them both. She planned to argue that her dalliances had even helped control her libido and taught her things that spiced up their love life. But even to herself, the reasoning sounded absurd. She knew Mike would see through the lies. Deep down, she understood her marriage was over. Finding the apartment stripped of his belongings was a harsh reality check. She sank to the floor, crying bitterly and cursing her arrogance. She had never prepared an explanation for her behavior because she never thought she'd be caught. For 3 years, she had succeeded. Then tonight, Mike had not only burned their relationship to the ground, but also destroyed her reputation. Mike, on the other hand, was enjoying his freedom. Before leaving New York, he had cloned his new phone, discarded the old SIM card, and tossed the device into the snow, ensuring no interruptions on his journey to Texas. Throughout the week, he had been sending out emails, each one personalized and containing evidence of infidelity. One by one, marriages were disintegrating, and the thought of the upheaval he had caused brought him satisfaction. Deirdre's husband Albert had received his email just the day before. Its contents had included videos and a candid conversation between Deirdre and Josephine, where they detailed their escapades, named their lovers, and laughed about their oblivious spouses. Albert had forwarded the evidence to the wives of the men mentioned, sparking further outrage. Back in New York, George had fared no better. His father had summarily fired and disinherited him. Randolph also dismissed the upper management responsible for the scandal, taking over as interim CEO while Helen began recruiting top executives from around the world to rebuild the company. Meanwhile, Mike was nearing his new home in Austin, Texas. As he approached Lady Bird Lake and passed the Austin Convention Center, he saw the exclusive high-rise condo on Rainey Street where he'd be staying. The rent, covered by his new firm for 6 months, would give him time to find the house with trees and a yard he so deeply wanted. Once settled, he planned to get a dog and start looking for a trustworthy partner who would value building a home and raising a family with him. His new colleagues were already planning a barbecue to introduce him as recently divorced, and had promised plenty of eligible women would be in attendance. Meanwhile, back in New York, the fallout continued. Spouses were exposing each other, alliances were crumbling, and betrayals were coming to light. Helen kept Mike updated, feeding him details of the chaos he had ignited. As Mike reflected on the inferno he had left behind in New York, he smiled. With every update, he grew more certain that leaving for Texas had been the right decision. And so today's story comes to an end. Did it unfold as you expected? Or did the twists catch you by surprise?